All right, the time is 6:01 p.m. and I'm calling to order a called meeting of the City Council of the City of Sunset Valley, Texas for Tuesday, March 26, 2024. And we are going to begin with public comments. If anybody wishes to step up to the podium and speak at this time, please do so. All right. Well, Council, we'll go ahead and move on to our light agenda, which is 3 items that we want to make sure that we are timely, given that they coincide with some events that are being held as well as the eclipse that's coming up. So we'll move on to agenda number 3, which is Council consideration of agenda items for approval on consent. And if anybody wants to make a motion for any of those items. Councilmember Rosengarten.
I move to approve on consent agenda item number 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, there's a motion to approve on consent items number 4, 5, and 6. Anybody want to withdraw one of those? Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor of approving on consent item number 4, 5, and 6, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. All right, we passed on consent. Approval of the minutes from the February 20th, 2024 regular meeting. Approval of a temporary special use permit, Keith Lambert to sell Eclipse glasses and merchandise and a tent April 2nd through April 8th, 2024 at the Market Fair Shopping Center, 5400 Brody Lane. And approval of a temporary special use permit for Austin's Pets Alive to host events that could exceed 50 attendees on Saturdays, March 30th and April 20th, 2024 at 4942 US Highway 290. Well, Council, that was all the formal agenda that we have out of the way. We are going to, and just as a note, we didn't have a staff update this month, but we will have one our next meeting. But I wanted to thank staff and the PD department for hosting our event over the weekend and the Public Works Open House. And I appreciate all the work that goes into that, as well as the preparation for hosting the Eclipse activities that'll happen on April 8th. I think we're out of glasses now. We're ordering more? Okay. If you do get a chance to attend, that would be a real special once-in-a-lifetime event, or at least maybe a couple times in a lifetime, depending on. All right. So, Council, the next item, this is really the focus of what we're meeting for tonight, and Councilmember Burrell is not able to attend, but I did speak to him beforehand, and since we're not taking any formal action, he feels comfortable moving forward until this becomes something that we may act on in the future. This is a continuation of the discussion that we had during our retreat in November. And prior to that, when we initially discussed it last year over the summer, looking at utility rates and potential changes that would allow us to reduce the amount of subsidy that we provide for operational support. The broad outlines of this, as far as what we came out of the discussions that I wanted to summarize, I think there's consensus that we want to work together to reduce the operational subsidy. We want to keep the infrastructure subsidy and potentially increase it to pay for long-term maintenance and repairs of our water and wastewater infrastructure. And so there's some rebalancing that we may end up doing as part of this to allow us to sustain those funds, the infrastructure reserves for water and wastewater, given that there's a projection that carries forward 30 years and gives us an idea of what those funds are and the balances will be. There's a few different approaches to this. Again, this is not an action. However, I'm going to be using the feedback from Council tonight in the budget that I'm initially, the broad budget outlines that I'm taking to Budget and Finance for that I'll be presenting as part of the Council meeting when we have that initial kickoff. But I want to make sure that we include this from the beginning if there is consensus to do so. And then any formal action would be on considering the budget and the rate changes as part of that budget. So what we brought forward last time was a proposed rate increase over 10 years that would be essentially amortized to bring that subsidy down to an amount that doesn't fund our operations with subsidies anymore and can fund some of our infrastructure work. There is a rate schedule that staff has put together at the back of our backup that includes both what the proposed 10-year schedule could be and as well rate changes based on meter sizes versus what we currently do right now, which is a flat rate for all residential. And so we'll discuss that in more detail. One of the things that I asked for as part of the work session was to identify a potential community assistance program for these rate changes to minimize the impact to our in most need residents who would be potentially affected by this the most, given limited income. And so staff has done some research on that and really looked at Austin as a model for potentially carrying forward a program that would provide that assistance. And we can talk about that in more detail and what council feedback is on that. And then finally, one thing we talked about at the retreat was whether we need to codify in our financial policies any of these changes, capping the subsidies for operations and having that be something that we actually put in our financial policy, since it was discussed in 2016, 2015, I can't remember when, but it was never actually detailed in the financial policies. Or having a financial policy that says our goal is by X year to have a phase out of the operational subsidy. So we can talk about that as well as part of this agenda item. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to staff for introduction, and then this is a working session, so feel free to raise your hand and jump in and have a discussion. So with that, staff.
Thank you, Mayor. So I will, and I did, provide council prior to the work session with some of the research that I've conducted, that really there's no city in the area that offers a customer assistance program, I think, like what we would want to offer our residents, except for the city of Austin. And I think they have a well thought out and solid program, and they have, for us, they have a good list of who would qualify, and also what those documents are to prove that they do qualify for the assistance. And so that has been provided in the backup. There's a link to the city of Austin. So, for example, all Medicaid, if a resident receives Medicaid, is on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is called SNAP. There's a Travis County program, and there's some other Veterans Assistance Supportive Housing. And then also included on the Austin website, which we would potentially copy, is these are the qualifying documents that would need to be submitted. And in discussion with the Public Works Director, we thought that the simplest way to calculate a CAP, that's Customer Assistance Program, would just be that if they qualify, they receive a 50% discount on their utility bill, which would include water, wastewater, and solid waste, which would hopefully help offset the gradual increases that we're proposing in the utility rates. Anything else for that? Okay. And then, yeah, as the mayor mentioned, currently we don't have, we do have a financial policy about passing along, passing through as rates increase. We are to pass those along, which now we have started doing, like, for example, with TDS, we've done the previous 2 years. But we don't have anything that codifies a potential, monetary cap on the operational subsidy. It could also be based on a percentage of sales tax revenue or a percentage of general fund operational expenses. We could also, in addition to that, or we could, rather than a cap, we could just say, the city's goal is to phase out the utility operational subsidy by, FY34 or whatever date city council elects. The Budget and Finance Committee hasn't discussed this yet. They are in review of financial policies, but I was waiting to have this work session where we would potentially talk about actually amending our financial policies before we take that to Budget and Finance. And I'm sure they're also going to want to discuss the proposed rate changes with you all during the, that's going to be a topic that we do at our initial budget meeting with them, with the committee. That meeting will be, Budget and Finance is going to finalize the budget calendar, but I want to say, let me bring that up. May 7th will be a preliminary, we'll do a work session prior to the regular meeting where we present a draft budget. And then the plan is Thursday, May 17th, will be a joint meeting with the council and the Budget and Finance Committee to kind of kick off the budget season.
Right, so the May 7th meeting is only council.
Council, correct.
And then May 17th is when we'll be having our, what has now been a process where we meet with Budget and Finance to outline goals and objectives for the budget as a
Correct.
council.
Yep.
Right.
That was the plan. And then I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn to discuss the.
So what I had put in the backup was some of the stuff we had presented back in, I think, December at the retreat regarding the 10-year kind of utilities, the rates, kind of spreading those costs and those increases out over a 10-year period. What we didn't include in there in 2008, in 2023, was we didn't look at the volumetric kind of charges and looking at the different tiers for water use. So I also included those in the backup. And as well as spreading out and making, as I mentioned before, the majority of residents do have small 5/8 meters, but there are some in there that have the larger meters. And if we are moving to a system that is meter-based, there are different rates for those meters that we would be trying to get to. Right now, these still are just focused on the residential rates. I haven't done an analysis on the commercial rates because some of those would actually go down over time. For some of those smaller meters, the larger meters would go up significantly. And so I need to still do some analysis on the commercial side to provide you that information. But we did try the rate changes as far as tiers, it went from basically 3 to 4 tiers that we have currently to a true 5-tier system, with some slight increases in that and in each one, until you get up, especially when you go over that 25,000 gallon mark, then it is a much more significant increase there. But those tiers are kind of spread out and added in some more intermediate tiers in there as well. So that's kind of where we left off with those rate proposals there. Vast majority of residents still are in that 5/8 meter category, which represents what we discussed, I believe, in December.
And I think, if I recall the conversation, we do have, and I think you said the vast majority, but we do have residents that are on larger meters, all the way up
Yes.
to 3-inch meters?
Yeah, and that's why I went in the proposed rate went up to the 3-inch. And some of so the reasoning behind that is that when you have a large meter on a residential property, that you are likely not having a large volume of water that they're using on a regular basis, it is more likely that they may not trigger the meters to actually read how much water they're using, because it just doesn't have as much flow going through there. So it leads to a lot of water loss on the city's end then. So that's some of the justification on why those meter rates go up the bigger the meters are, especially on a residential surface. So when talking with TRWA, there are some, we could obviously offer to change out and move them to a smaller meter and reduce their meter size. And there's also some other reducers and stuff that could accomplish the same goals. I imagine the folks who I know who have a 3-inch meter, they are a fair distance away, and I imagine that's why they put it in there in the first place, was thinking they were going to get less friction loss and more water pressure along the line going all the way to their house. But we've seen a lot of other residents who are equal distance away who have a 1.5-inch meter, and they seem to be fine.
Would that be something that the city could come up, for example, with a subsidy, like, or a rebate for example, for changing out the meter, or would that be the city could do that?
The city would change out the meter.
Okay, because it's on our city property, not on their
Yeah,
property.
the meters are, so we would change out the meter if they're, if they would agree to it, but.
Right.
But if they don't agree, then we have rates to address those larger meters where we would likely see water loss.
Okay. And just to make sure I'm clear on this, so when we have the proposed, we're calling this fiscal year 2025, of course, we may decide that, the timing of this is something that we're going to be talking about tonight. But for example, the 5/8 meter, the 11.06, if you go up to the table above,
That would go up to.
well, yeah, and I'm sorry, one more, the 10-year. Yeah, so that essentially is under that 2025 column, the water base rate is just for the 5/8 meter.
Yes,
And then we're also talking about that's where the incremental base rate would increase, so that base rate for 5/8 meter would increase, but there would be a corresponding increase for the larger meter sizes.
yeah, they would
that's
all
part of this.
increase by little less than $2 a year.
Right. Okay. All right, council, this is the time to jump in with thoughts. I do have, some initial thoughts are, obviously, we want to do an outreach, right? To say this is something that, might be coming or we want to get feedback on. We did publish that information in the newsletter, I think in the March or February newsletter, probably February
I think
newsletter.
it was February. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we received much feedback or comments to date. But again, the newsletter may be one of those things that it's hard, to reach out directly. Was it discussed at the open house at all, or was that part of the discussion? Okay.
No, it's too much, there's too much going on at open house for
Right.
for those kind of discussions.
So we might talk about outreach. We also might talk about there's two changes that we're proposing. One is potentially rate increases, right, which is going to have an impact on any user. And then there's the schedule change, which is another layer of that increase, right? We're essentially redoing our rate schedules for volumetric, and we're changing to a meter-based system. And so we're talking about increasing the cost, but also changing how we calculate cost as well in both these things. And so one option is that we look at this and we say it's appropriate and there's justification for it, we want to move forward, we make both those changes at a time, or we look at making one or the other initially, and then we go forward with other changes. So that's something I want to get feedback on as well. There is going to be, obviously 10 years is something that it's a long enough time, but you can see the schedule does, if you go back up to that schedule, it does start increasing, the cost, especially when you get to 2035, if we're going to have this goal of reducing operational subsidy, and then reusing that money, reinvesting in our infrastructure would be my goal as well. Councilmember Johnson?
So to that, and I didn't read this anywhere, that when it comes time to talk to our neighbors about why we're raising the rates, it's not only just because we kind of just spend a ton of money on it, but so part of it is just kind of breaking even with the service, not even making money how some other cities do, which is totally cool. But I feel like there's 3 other things that we're doing potentially. Infrastructure is kind of in there, but just kind of putting a little bit of money away for when we do have to. There was the chart about when the water lines are going to come up and that would come out of the utility fund, right? So, so having this, go ahead.
Well, I would just say one talking point would be that, with as small as Sunset Valley is, and with as few, both residential and customers, that, for all of you, the residents and the commercial, to try to pay for the infrastructure would just be that, your rates would go sky high, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we're not proposing, we want the infrastructure subsidy to remain. We want the general fund to continue to fund our capital improvement projects for the utility fund. So, in order to make sure we fully fund that, this is why we want to reduce the operational subsidy, because it just has kept growing.
Do we have a sense of what the needed, the average injection into those funds is to make them?
We do have
solid?
those.
It's 500,000 to
Yeah.
break even
Right.
for infrastructure for the future.
Yeah, and so I think last year we put in about 130,000. If I remember the budget, it was 74,000 into water and 55,000 into wastewater.
Yeah.
Right, so we're underfunding our infrastructure.
We're underfunding
and
infrastructure greatly.
we need to figure out a way to fund it for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be one potential way is, the general fund increases the amount of infrastructure funding, and we are essentially taking away some of the funding we're having to provide for operational costs to offset that. So that's one sort of major.
Oh, yeah, and so I had 2 other ones that I wanted to make sure that we're kind of thinking about. When you said we should be putting away 500 and we only put away 140, I was thinking about, sounds like my financial advisor. Just it's you're retiring at 55 is not going to happen, Rob. So the 2 other things, the funding for the possible rebates. I was busy with the egg hunt the whole time, but there was a guy right there, and I think I saw Rudy talking to him. Was the guy that was right there? Yeah. How many other people were here for that? And is he always here, or is that group always here?
He's here. He's been here before, yeah.
Okay. So, and this is a bigger thing, but I want to make sure that maybe we can even fund that through all of the possible rebates and that we're looking at, that $1 million. I know that's gonna come from wherever, but to continue on that kind of program, just to allow people to not see a lot of these higher bills for, you know, if that could also be funded through this, that, I think that would be, I just don't want to have a situation where we're going back to the general fund for all of for any extra utility needs. And then the last one is, you guys had mentioned needing to secure our own water rights one day, and we don't know how much that's going to be. And it would also be nice not to have to raid the general fund for that as well. At this point, we're talking about like, that might be a lot more money, because we're already talking about $300 and some thousand, but I just, have you run the 2035 numbers through and just say like, all right, at the current use and how much we usually spend?
This includes a 3% increase year over year, like operational costs, basically. So that's how I came up with this numbers, basically, is to also adjust what we were thinking we need based on inflation.
So inflation is some of it. Part of it is also just getting us back to paying for the water that you're using and not, so, yeah, so I don't know how hard, if we can figure out how much more it's gonna cost for water rights at one point, and, which we don't
Rate
know.
increases from Austin, right? That's the other thing is that we don't have these.
Yeah, I don't know what, if Austin comes back with an increase, if we may need to adjust these rates, then proportionally. So if Austin comes back with a 7% increase, we may need to kind of adjust what our rate increases are, 7% to kind of meet that demand.
Yeah, cut once, cut deep kind of thing, where it's like, if we're gonna ask for more money, then just like kind of do it. And
And I can reach out to Austin and see when, last year I was under the impression that this year was the year we would see some rate increases. So what I would propose is that if they do come back and they do have an increase in rates, and we do a proportional increase in what we're looking at, like I said, 7%, we go up, it is by 7%.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, cool, thank you.
I'm going to say the longer, oh, go ahead, Rudy.
Have you called on?
The longer Austin puts off raising water rates, probably the bigger the rate increase is going to be.
I would agree.
We used to keep a chart schedule that showed how much we put aside. We would recommend, Budget and Finance would recommend to council that any excess anticipated revenue would go first into infrastructure before council could do projects. And so do you have that chart by chance that you could show us, or could you pull it up before the next council meeting and show it? Do you remember that? It went out 40 years.
I
and
have
it
a
was-
40-year plan for infrastructure. I'm not sure I have one that,
And it showed when we were going to be in the red.
yes, oh yeah, Matt can pull that up real
That one.
quick.
And while you pull that up, I'm just going to remind everybody, we have 7 master meters from Austin to Sunset Valley. We have 7 miles of water line. We have 5 miles of sanitary sewer lines. We have 1 lift station. We have 294 customer meters. We have 246 residential, 13 commercial, and the commercial have 2 to 3 meters each with irrigation separate. Public Works maintains 18 meters on city properties. Public Works maintains the well for irrigation of the city property. Water loss is anywhere from 6 to 17%. In 2020, it was 15.3%. Commercial usage is 52%, residential is 32%, multifamily is 11%, for a total of 95%. So right there says we're losing something. With that information, we should have a chart that shows what all these lines of water line, how old they are, how new they are, when anticipation is for them to be replaced, as this 40-year chart should show, and then what our anticipated cost is at that time.
Yeah, go ahead. It's down at the bottom. Yeah, that one, yeah. So this shows overall when we go into the red, hold on, so I can get off the record. This shows when we would go on red, into the red, based on the different kind of investment strategies. I was like,
Really
I
need
can't
to-
see it that from here.
Yeah, forgive
So
us,
if we
but-
only invested, basically the 210, which kind of was the standard back in 2021,
It was
I
like a
think it was.
7% that we would put into infrastructure, if I remember right.
It was a set number. I don't know if it was a percent or not.
It was a
yeah.
percentage, because we put a percentage one year, and then the next year it'd be a little higher, and so on.
Yeah, right now, what happened in 2020 at least, I think it was that we were putting in like 210,000. It was a flat rate. It wasn't a full percentage of anything that I'm aware of.
And please forgive me, but my eyes cannot see.
Oh, it's super,
it's on page
I can barely
28.
see, and I'm like right here. So this was if we did the $210,000 dollar investment and we just kept that up, then it would go in the red by 2038. If we increased that and did $300,000 a year, it would be 2041. $400,000 would take us to, I think, not much further out than that. Scroll over, yeah, 2046. And even the $500,000, you were coming pretty close. I mean, you'd make it to 2051, and you'd probably be closer to break even at that point. But that would be replacing all of the infrastructure. If you, in that document there, if you go up a little bit, Matt, there should be like what gets replaced when. Yeah, the schedule. So here's kind of the schedule of what, and this is, can you go over to the left and let's see what we got. That is the wastewater. So if you go over to water, you're looking at what needs to be replaced. And you can see what happens is there's this period that starts really in, can you go up a little bit? 2034 basically, where you have lots of big value things that would be replaced in that period of time. And so that's just water. When you add wastewater on top of that, it really compounds itself over that period of time, because that's when you're looking at when I think probably it starts with the meadows being put in and things like that, where you're starting to see a lot of compounding things coming through for a 40-year replacement. Now, granted, wastewater, you can kind of shift a little bit because we do inspect wastewater lines and we can make different evaluations on those lines. But water lines, we've been pretty consistent about replacing them after a 40-year period, just because you cannot, not with the size of the lines, there's not a good inspection technique. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen where Austin has thrown some things down into the bigger lines, but those things get stuck in the bigger lines. They aren't going down the small lines, which is mostly what we have. I mean, we have mostly 8-inch lines.
I'm trying to find money in my head. So with 27 million in the bank and the interest we are making on that 27 million, we're getting close to $1 million. If we put $1 million into infrastructure, we can go for 4.76 years with paying the 210. So we can go almost 5 years out into the future with infrastructure contribution of $210,000. So that would take care of that. And then on the water, wastewater, and solid waste, we talked previously, and I agreed at that time and thought it was a done deal, that if we cap just the utilities, not including the infrastructure, at 500,000, then we could budget better. And the only question I have, well, I shouldn't say only, because I don't know what could come out next. When you cap it at 500,000, when would you cap it? So each month, we'd have to look at how much we subsidized for the residents, and then as we get closer to the end of the year, October, November, December, the full bill would be on the residents. That would be closer to the wastewater averaging months,
Yeah.
so it would be lower, but they would still have a full.
I think you would, in the budget process, if we went with a cap system, you would have to adopt rate schedules that meet that cap,
Yeah.
right, for that year. So you'd have to reevaluate it every year, and the
Yep.
rates would be based on
So
the cap.
instead of having 3 months at the end of the year where you pay your full wastewater, solid waste,
Yeah.
and water. You're saying doing it to where the rates are increased to where we're anticipating it's capped at 500,000. That would be tough
Yeah,
to
because
do.
you have to
You've got too many unknowns.
you have to adopt your rates at the beginning of the fiscal year. I mean, you can change, I'm sure you can adopt new rates, you know, but it would just be,
It would be hard then to determine what those rates would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
at that point. I think it would be better to budget a rate structure that we're trying to aim for that, because right now, the infrastructure, the operational subsidy is more than that. So we would still need to raise the rates to meet that need. And kind of going back to what Councilmember Johnson was saying, is that we're also hoping to get more people to do water conservation and do different projects like that, that will hopefully, I mean, with the ability to get a rebate from the city of Sunset Valley on top of a Austin water rebate, there's a lot of opportunity to do some really great conservation projects throughout the city that could help residents save a lot of money. I know I had just recently met with, I believe, the president of the HOA, and you know they're going to look at, they're doing some changes and wanting to really promote, I think, a lot of those rebate programs. I think there's a, they were trying to change the rules to allow a more percentage of xeriscaping that would be allowed.
Councilor Young?
To go back to what Rob was saying about how we talk to folks about this, one of the other things we can do is say, here's what's likely to happen in the future. Not just that Austin's likely to raise water rates. You know, along with, we're gonna have to negotiate with LCRA at some point when Austin stops providing us water. But just what's gonna happen in the future. We've had several drought years, right? The last time I looked, Lake Travis was down to 37%, something like that. There was an article not too long ago about Georgetown running out of water by 2030, which is not going to happen because they had to go to Robertson County, which is north of College Station, to get, I think, 62.5 million gallons of water a year to meet their demands, to take them up to 2050. There's going to be this increased competition for water in Texas and everywhere else. And if we have a few drought years, it's going to get even worse. And we need to be prepared for that. And bringing our rates up is part of that, investing in our utilities is part of that. But this is all likely to happen. And it's better for us to be out in front of this in some way than have to react to a crisis when it happens. Because the probability is pretty good a crisis will happen.
One of the, going back to kind of the cap, there's some, certainly I think the cap has been a useful metric, right? You know, we've exceeded the cap for years now in terms of like what we subsidize. If we went to a $500,000 cap with this budget and adjusted the rates to accommodate it, my understanding is that it would be a more significant increase than what's proposed here, because we're basically $200,000 over the cap right now. And if we take $200,000 and distribute that among the 250 households, you know, obviously it's not the same by household. That's a lot to make up, right? So we can't, the cap is a bigger shock than something like this, where we can get to that. However, you know, I think that's something to consider, is just, this is could be done in conjunction with the cap. It's somewhat cross purposes with the cap, because eventually you want to get to the point where there is no operational subsidy, there's only infrastructure subsidy if we proceed with this. But I think they can be used in conjunction potentially to manage the process. It's just that, you know, the cap right now, that $200,000 is a way bigger increase than what's being proposed with this schedule, because it's 1 year versus multiple years. So we'd have to look at maybe a phased cap, right, to match this kind of schedule versus a single number.
Given the kind of complexity of that, is it possible for us to say instead we're going to have some sort of thing where at the end of the fiscal year we pay out to households?
In other words, if we, as a council, adopted new rates and maybe you can explain a little bit more, because I'm trying to think of how that would work.
In other words, we raise the rates to a certain point. And at the end of the fiscal year, depending on various things, we say we can pay out this much as a water subsidy to all the households.
And the goal of that would be to change this schedule, or would it be to minimize this for near-term impacts?
To minimize near-term impacts.
Okay. So, for example, in 2025, if we adopted these rates, instead of having this monthly increase of, it would be a monthly increase of 852, but there may be for just the base rate, of course, and then the volumetric would change too. We would potentially be able to provide a rebate at the end of the year
Right.
that would essentially carry some of the weight of these increases.
And you could say that cap is 500,000, so what is our delta? How much more were our expenses than our revenues? Right, and subtract that from the 500,000, assuming that expenses exceed revenues, and that's what we pay out to the households. I don't really know if it's a workable plan, I'm just throwing it out there.
Sure. Councilor Johnson?
I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't know what people would say if I said it, so thank you for saying it, because you sound much more than me when you say it. But yeah, it's kind of like not a dividend, I mean, it's just like, hey, we did all right, and like, now split it up in here and, soften the blow. I mean, just like, from some optical side, it's just like, hey, we're not trying to like stick it to you, but it's like, we gotta rein this in. And the thing is, we won't see it, but eventually $500,000, just won't be that much of our budget. And at one point, we just kind of like say, it's not that much money anymore. That's probably like when my daughters are my age. And then at that point, we can just like take it off. But I don't know. I think we need, go ahead.
So it gives us some optionality about how we want to support the citizens, right?
Yeah. Like, I don't think, I was looking at what my bill will be in 2035. And I'm like, ooh, but it's like, hopefully I'm making a little bit more money then. So, each year is not a hit, but then, you get 11 years in the future and it starts to feel like a little like, but then again, I forget what, I think $1,200 a year, $1,400 a year, whatever it's gonna be, just won't be that big of a deal then. But, yeah, part of me wants to just like rip the Band-Aid off. Another side of me kind of is thinking what you're thinking, where it's just like, have this and kind of just like pay it out, but it just kind of like,
Yeah, we can.
we're capping on this side, so they can still do like the easy thing, like the mathematically and systemically easy thing with the rates. And then we can
Rather
just,
than trying to recalculate them through the year.
Right.
I mean, and it can be based on, from year to year, do we have the wherewithal to do this or not? Because some years we may not. Who knows what's gonna happen?
yeah.
Councilmember Medicus?
So honestly, I think that kind of a bonus, a rebate, whatever you want to call it, becomes expected. And then if we have a year where we can't give it, then we're going to have residents being upset with us. And I think we do need to rip the Band-Aid off. We've kicked this can down the road for way too many years. We need to cover the cost of providing this service, period. I mean, that's not unreasonable, and I'm looking at the rates. It's not that much of an increase. I mean, lots of other bills I get every month have a bigger increase than that in it. And this is basic support. This is water and wastewater. I mean, it's a necessity. So being able to cover our costs of that, I think, is really important. We need to get out of this pattern, personally. I mean, and I'm on a fixed income, so.
Mayor, can I do a little point of order here? I wish we had an attorney, but I think what you guys are discussing is illegal. And so I just want to perhaps jog the memory of the city administrator, who I think will remember this, but we can't have different rate structures for residents and commercial. And so if we do a rebate for one, we're going to have to rebate for the others. It becomes an illegal proposition. So much as I appreciate the discussion, I wish we had an attorney here to clarify that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, so I let our city attorney know he didn't have to attend because there was no action, but I'll propose the question, but I'm pretty sure I already know the answer. Yeah, we paying out a subsidy at like the end of the year, I think we're getting in really troubling waters, especially because we have the two the customer distinctions right now, and that the commercial customers really aren't receiving the rebates like the residents are receiving.
And-
So I would say we steer away from there. I'll get a legal opinion if you want, but it's probably going to be, probably going to be no. I was going to make one comment because you guys are discussing, it sounds like, do we want to do this incrementally? Do we want to rip the Band-Aid off? I think there are advantages to both. I will say, something that I'm kind of shocked is that we really have not received formal complaints. I've asked Lori, I've asked other staff, both years we've increased the trash bill. It's still a really good deal. I just paid my Austin trash bill last week. It's $9.13 now. And we haven't received any, we've like almost doubled it now 2 years in a row, and we haven't. I was expecting we'd get more calls, and we haven't. So, but still, that is incremental. It's not like we went to the full cost of trash in one fiscal year. So, I can see both. Yeah, I do think the city needs to address this issue, but I think it's an easier to market and easier to explain to your neighbors if we're doing this incrementally.
I think I heard two compelling arguments why what I suggested is a bad idea. And that was kind of playing devil's advocate there, but it does not sound like it's viable at all.
And again, we probably won't go down this route, but another way to do it, which I don't see how it would be run against the law, is we have rebates for so many different things, but just like, do you ever have rebates for just like your behavior? Because like some people are just, use too much water just as they are, you know what I mean? And well, you could do xeriscaping, you could do all of these different things to get rebates for them, but if you have a pool, you're going to use more water. And if you are like Mrs. Lucas, actually she has a pool, so that's a bad example. If you're Ruth, then, she doesn't use probably that much water, so.
I think that was the reasoning behind we don't charge you if you use, I believe that was the reasoning
Okay.
for that, if you, is it 3 or 5? It's 3. If you use 3,000 or under, you just don't get charged at all. Good job. But again, the issue with that is if you have so many people in your household versus 1 or 2, that becomes really hard to attain, even if you're really good at conserving water.
We would never get it.
Exactly. So that
I got
in
3
of
daughters
itself,
who were just like,
the spirit of that is to reward good behavior, but there's just some households that will never be able to achieve that. So that really isn't an equitable incentive.
but it's worth a try, don't you think?
We tried.
Rudy, did you have your hand?
I lost my thought. I know what it was. At the same token, there are people who have wells yet, and they use that for their landscape, where the rest of us have only one source of water for our landscape and for our household. I remember a while back when there was a council member from Oakdale came into our neighborhood and said, "Oh my gosh, how brown your yards look," and his yard was green. It's because he has a well. So there's also that's we have to keep into consideration.
Councilmember Medicus?
Getting to this point, I think this is reasonable over 10 years for us to get viable so that we're covering our actual costs. But perhaps as we have income available at the end of the year, we increase the subsidies for xeriscaping and all those rebates. We can look at putting it towards those water efficient processes and increasing them for the next year.
Yeah. To add to that, I think, and this is something I think we missed just in preparing for this backup, is one thing we also discussed as this operational subsidy is phased out. It's not like this, I think someone mentioned it, this money just is going to be spent on anything. We wanted to earmark it either for you know, we can earmark it for more rebates and conservation strategies, or we can earmark it for projects, right? Like this money, we're not just putting this money to be spent on whatever, you know, staffing, whatever in the general fund, that it would have a dedicated, you know, either it would go to conservation efforts, it would go to projects.
Yeah, I mean, that was something we discussed at the retreat, and, you know, having a committed, you know, assignment to these dollars, once we pay for the infrastructure, once they pay for the rebates, you know, or whatever it is, but the idea being that, like you said, it's easier for us to sell if we say the money that is coming into the fund that we were spending from the general fund now has a specific purpose that has a general benefit, right?
But probably for then the first, you know, 4 or 5 years, that difference is just going to be sent to
Infrastructure, right.
beefing up the infrastructure transfer, because we do want to start putting at least the 500,000 in.
Yeah, the first year, that would probably be 50,000. It's 100, yeah, because we're only talking about like
Yeah,
$50,000
yeah.
more a year in terms of what the income would be, so. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, I wanted to like firewall both funds, so it's not general kind of like paying for excessive, you know, utility issues and vice versa. Which actually brings to my mind that, you know, if people see, and again, we haven't heard anything, but it's just gonna happen. I mean, it's 10 years for God's sakes. Like, I don't want to run into a situation where these rates are going up and then we're doing stuff on Brody and people just like connect those two dots and it's like, so I don't know how a lot of that is just us out on, like when we're talking to our neighbors, because I don't think a newsletter that just says, by the way, these are two different pools of money, don't worry about it. But yeah, I think there's some education that has to go around like where the money is coming from for different things. For the water rebate stuff, are they considering that I just had this thought, are they considering metal roofs as part of the, because we just got our roof redone just a few years ago after, I think it was like the last big hailstorm. And I wanted a metal roof, and at no point did they say, oh, well, you won't be able to capture it for like human consumption. I don't think it's probably great for plants. That is true, right? You probably shouldn't drink water after.
I mean, some people do
Some
drink
people do?
water off their roof. But I will say, it requires, you know, pretty advanced and probably expensive filtration systems to make that happen. You definitely don't want to drink water that comes off an asphalt roof generally. But yeah, I know people who have like true rainwater systems that feed their homes basically.
Oh, yeah, like, and the thing, what I found out after the fact, that it's like if you actually have a metal roof, and anyone else? You do. What's that? Okay, but it is, if you're gonna consume it, then it's better to come from so, I mean, but now you're talking at least for my small house, like a $30,000, $40,000 outlay instead of whatever. But I guess it's worth a look if we were putting more money into it, because that's just like not a possibility for us. It's irrigation only, basically.
Yes.
Which we do.
Well, and irrigation makes up a huge amount of water use.
Yeah,
within the
yeah,
city.
for sure.
So,
Okay, thank you.
Rudy?
Even if you're being conservative on water in your yard, there's your trees. The same token, you want to keep your trees alive, and you want to keep them from getting dry. So if there's a fire situation, that you don't go up with the fire.
true, I would say that, I mean, trees have very, you know, they have a different kind of root system than grass does. Grass needs more constant watering than a tree will. Trees can survive pretty long without drought, and even in a lot of our, you know, deepest droughts, I guess you could say, it took a very long time before the cedars even reached that kind of ignitability point. So most of the people don't have a lot of just cedar in their yard. I mean, there's some that obviously definitely do. Because those have a little bit more flammability to them. But yeah, I think, I mean, you do water your trees, but there's a different kind of regiment to water them. They're not quite, you know, you water them deep and more infrequently than water than a grass lawn does. Grass definitely is going to take up a lot more water than any trees will. And trees also, they capture water, they really reduce, the heat and stuff like that around that affects evapotranspiration. So they have a lot of other benefits.
So what rate could we come up with that would get us to a cap of 500,000 on
Wanting to
subsidies?
rip the Band-Aid off, or
No,
okay.
I don't want to rip the Band-Aid off.
So even with, I think we just did the math on 262 residential households, that's still a $50 increase per month just to cap it at 500,000.
Okay,
152,000, I think we estimated out 262 residential households divided by 12,
Yeah,
that's
the
$48
FY
a month.
The FY23,
Did our city
sorry,
grow?
FY24, this year's operational subsidy was 652,000, so 152,000 over that. 500,000. Yeah, I pulled it up here. So it was, very, very large in FY23, but then, we shifted some public works expenses and took out all of the solid waste that wasn't directly to TDS, right? So we got it to 652, 644.
652, 644.
So, yeah, sorry, let me. So last year, the operational was much higher, and we we did the 210 in FY23, but this year we added that extra, this was the America. Yes. So we're closer to that 500,000. We're closer, yeah, we're much closer after realigning some expenses, but it's still to rip the Band-Aid off as we keep using it would be about, I think that was like 48 something a month per household.
Regarding what I interpret or potentially interpret you saying is that one option is to take that 10-year schedule that we have here and recalculate it based on a $500,000 cap, right? So that that $500,000 wouldn't hit all at once, like $50 a month in next year. It would be spread over 10 years, right?
So then is the goal then at the end of 10 years to only have not $0 subsidy, but $500,000?
Well, I think that's what
how it would
Councilman
come out, yeah.
Rosengard
But I
was
thought-
suggesting.
I thought it would be easier to do a 500,000 cap starting now, but you're saying, nope, that's ripping off
that
a
would be-
Band-Aid.
That's be more
Because
painful.
we'd have to come up with $162,000 in rates, and that would be all charged to the residents. So that would be.
I think this is more humane, I think,
This is a much
little bit
simpler over
time,
10
and
years,
then
yeah.
You know what it's gonna be,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can budget for that.
And I mean, I really did think we'd get more feedback about increasing the trash rates, and we didn't, because I don't think it was a huge, compared to what your grocery bill has gone up, it wasn't a huge amount of money. But we understand that now with adding wastewater and water increases, that really is gonna start to show up year to year. But we've got a customer assistance program to if you qualify, to offset that. And that would be funded we would just create a general fund line item for that. We just don't know, I think we're maybe $10,000 for the first year. We just don't know, how many households will qualify.
You said 262 residential households, but I have a note from before, 246.
Thinking of the total number of residential households, you're correct, because I was thinking, because there are definitely some without water service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have been seeing, though, that I know of at least one, and possibly two, residential customers that are on wells that have now gotten on city water just with issues with their wells or, the wells drying up, so.
Councilmember Johnson?
It's somewhat related. The letter that came home for the what's the website where you get to track had a funny domain name for signing up for like water alerts?
Water?
Maybe that's not that strange. But it said that you guys are almost done rolling out the the meters. Sylvia had said that at one point there was like some people that were just like never put on, like never issued bills. Like, so they were moved to municipal water and then they just like never were. And
Yeah, I think there were a couple that were found that, and we've been doing an audit because we're having to do a line audit anyhow. We're making sure everybody's wastewater is getting charged wastewater now too.
okay, cool.
So
So hopefully that'll make up a little of the difference, right?
small amount. There's only so many households to choose from still.
Councilmember Medicus?
So I just wonder, speaking of bills, how many do we have a lot of people who are past due on their bills that are having problems paying their bills on these bills?
I would say we don't have a great amount of, I think there's some, we see a lot of repeat, right? Like, cyclical, like, and we have to send out, late notices. Every once in a while, we do have to disconnect for non-payment. And now, thankfully, we do have actual, procedures in place. It was kind of wishy-washy before, but now we've got like a system in place. So Lori has, she knows that she sends out the bill, and if it's not paid, she sends a late notice. Then there's a, you've got to pay by this date, or it's a disconnect, and we put a door hanger on, right? Okay. But that, I would say the disconnect, and then the disconnect is you've made a payment plan, because we also work with customers, both residential and commercial, if they are having issues, and we try to get them on a payment plan to get them caught up. And then if you default on that payment plan, then we can go and disconnect.
To add to that question, are we talking commercial customers or residential?
Both. I haven't seen a commercial customer with an issue in a while, but I mean the residential, payment plans, and I can't give you an exact number, but it does happen.
So that's a form of assistance too, being able
Payment
to go on
plans.
a payment plan.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's something I think when Sylvia was here, we cleaned up because there were residents that were getting charged, but they weren't paying, right? And so there was like something now that we put out a notice saying you have to pay or get assistance or, whatever the process is. But that cleaned up a lot of the issues there as well, so.
So Jamar, he's our great rep for TDS, and I spoke with him at the open house, and he said that a lot of residents came up and engaged with him, and what he kept hearing and getting asked for is, we want weekly green waste pickup, right? Which again would,
Cost
and
money.
so he's going to go put a cost estimate to us, but that could potentially be another increase. But if that's what residents really want, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn, but if we went to a weekly green waste pickup, that could then potentially include food waste?
Yeah, that could potentially include food waste for a true, like, more of a composting style program, because food waste is considered to be putrescible, and so it has to be removed once a week. So I know there's a lot of folks in Austin who do have the weekly kind of pickup, so that is considered, you can do more of a composting style program than what we can currently do.
Yeah, and that's also something that we haven't done this, but we could potentially do that as a request or additional fee for individuals, right? And I'm not sure, it would be obviously more costly to do that for people to sign up for versus just providing it as a general service, but.
Yeah, that would definitely be more costly,
Right.
probably, especially per individual household, yeah.
Can you go back to the meter change? Yeah. So one of the concerns I mentioned in the beginning is that we're not only thinking about changing our rates, but we're also changing how we calculate the rates. And, I think this is well-researched. We had the Texas Rural Water Association come in and make a justification for why this is a better structure and why most cities do this. However, I worry about those residents that have those larger meters without a thoughtful process to say, we can convert you, right? And what that would look like and what the cost of that would be. So understanding, like, if we took those residence classes that have larger than 5/8 meters and we looked at what the cost would be to convert them all, assuming they all opted into that, that's another cost that we'd have to, factor in, right? Not necessarily it could come out of the general fund, it could come out of, multiple places. But I would like to see kind of an estimate of what that cost might be from a infrastructure update, conversion.
Yeah, I can look at the prices. I will say for us, because as purchasing the meters, a 5/8 meter is much less expensive than us purchasing and replacing it with a 3-inch meter. So it may, if we can get them to change to smaller meters, it is, especially if there's houses that have not been switched out already to the AMI meters, it would be cheaper for us to do that in the end.
Other thoughts, council?
I think we need to get it done in a humane way that is incremental over a period of time. And 10 years to get solvent, I think, is reasonable.
I think that one thing that I would like to get feedback on is, this outreach component and how we can get, before, we formalize anything, right, that we have an opportunity for residents to give their feedback. We haven't, one newsletter, helpful, but it's not, capturing, I think, the residents and listening to that. So I'm just open to ideas about how we talk to the neighbors, right? As Councilmember Johnson said, and listen, whether that's something we have a notice that we put out and we have a discussion with the residents, but
I think, if we maybe pitch it as a town hall meeting where, I don't know, staff and or council is leading something, may have to pick a brain or two, but in 2014, did we have any sort of town hall style meetings, or was it all those discussions just handles at committees and council? I'm trying to remember. It's a long time ago. Sure, yeah. Yeah, I don't think we've ever had a town hall style meeting just on utility rates. It was always done either at a committee or at council, right? Or did we? Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing we could do, council, we will have an opportunity, depending on what direction and feedback we have, which I've already got a lot of. On the May 7th council meeting, we could, when we're doing the preliminary budget presentation, we could also have a time certain utility rate discussion, right? That we could advertise in the newsletter, and you could talk to neighbors about attending and giving their feedback. And I think what we'd want to do there is have a comprehensive sort of, this is the reason why, this is how the money would be used, and that would give, at least it's not necessarily a town hall style format, but I think that would give me a more visibility into feedback than what we've gotten so far. Councilmember Johnson?
Just, there's something that popped in my head. When you have to pay for water rights, is it a one-time, it can't be a one-time thing, it's like probably a,
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. I'd have to do some research on that, because we never made it that far
Yeah.
with LCRA.
Fairly certain it's gonna
Continual.
be.
Yeah.
because
It'll
it's
be
not
continual.
like you're just paying someone, paying a rancher for water. I mean, it's probably paying for like like, goes to like LCRA or something, or whoever you're getting the water from to maintain
Right, so.
the transmission.
Yeah, you'd be paying, so we're gonna be paying twice, basically. We would be paying LCRA for the right to have the water, basically. And then we will also still be paying the city of Austin for them to treat the water and deliver it to us. So, which would change our rates. We would be paying a different rate than we currently do, but you would be paying LCRA and the city of Austin.
Right. The guy that was here from,
TRWA?
terrible acronym. Yeah, I got right that one. But he said something that just like stuck in my mind, and then I think I've told every person I see walking down the street is like, the water is free, but like the treatment and the transmission cost money.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is just like a kind of a thing that I never even realized that, yeah, we're not charging you for the water, but if you want clean water. So I was just thinking like, well, it can't just be a one-time thing, it has to be
Yeah.
like an ongoing, okay.
Association. Councilmember Johnson, or Councilmember Young?
The other thing was, do we have any kind of consensus on the infrastructure subsidy? Do we think it should be $500,000 a year or not?
Based on the schedule, and this is something that, I don't know if Public Works has weighed in on that schedule you showed, Carolyn, in terms of the estimated projects and timelines and the $500,000 getting us out to 2050. When was the last time they looked at that and kind of gave feedback on
I
saying?
think it would have been last year, or it was in 2020. We did look at it. Yeah, no, I think we did. We had at least one meeting, because then we went to Budget and Finance. I don't know if it was last summer or the summer before that we started discussing it. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, and then they referred it, I think, to Finance at that point. I would have to double check on exactly when that was.
And if I recall, one of the changes we made in the past several years was based on their feedback, changing it from a 30-year replacement schedule to a 40-year replacement schedule, which is
Yes.
what they believe is the appropriate planning process. And
Right.
that's how we gain some time.
Yes, you
further.
gained a lot of time from that.
Okay. So I think my goal would be as quickly as possible to fully fund the infrastructure, which may, require us to have a bigger outlay for the general fund next year, because if we're increasing the infrastructure subsidy, we won't be decreasing the operational subsidy by enough to offset that. One approach is that whatever we offset the operational cost by, we just put it to infrastructure, and that's what we budget for. And so instead of $362,000 this year, well, it's variable because we have that, extra funding, it would be another $50,000 until we catch up to the target of funding level that we need to for a 40-year infrastructure plan. So that would be my recommendation, is that any cost savings we have on the operational side, we just fund it in infrastructure until we now have reached a point where we actually have excess money that we can put into rebates or put into projects if we go down that route.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Councilmember Johnson?
So are we just looking for, on this sheet here, the amount of money that we want to remain in the black for a 40-year loop? Right? Is that's what we're kind of
We're
like,
trying to remain in the black.
yeah. But, I mean, this doesn't take into account like inflation.
No, I did take it, in everything I've considered about 3% inflation. Now, one of the things we have to consider is that when we did this number, this was I think we did this in 2023 early, or 2022, I can't remember exactly. But it was before, I think we considered 9% inflation, when we had a year where everything really bumped up really high. And one of the things I think we can do is kind of reevaluate those numbers based a little bit on today's kind of inflation rate, and look back at that inflation rate.
Well, this one in 2051 shows a deficit, not much, but
Yeah.
is that, if I saw 2052, would it just be more, or do you think it would go back in the
Hopefully-
black?
Hopefully, yeah, and this would be kind of, we'll definitely have to look at how we're planning projects and what projects are coming along and spacing them out appropriately too, so that we don't have any time where we're really, hopefully, going down below that 2051 kind of mark.
Do these problems ever become just like solved? Like, this is just like how much you put away? You know?
Sure.
Well, but it's, we're not, where are we right now? We're like way up at the top of this.
Oh, we're way behind because we've had at least another year of not putting away enough.
But are we just at the mercy of like some extreme event, or like another council just being like, well, screw that, we need the money for something else, and then we just, things can change at any time, but I just think of, does anything in municipalities just, go on auto drive? It's like, this is how much you put away, and then it's just like, don't worry about it.
Well, I mean, you can see that $500,000 flat is going to have a diminishing amount of value if we just keep it at that. So tying it
exactly.
tying it to a increase or a percentage of the budget or something like that makes.
That was my thing, like even $500,000 will solve our problem. Well, until $500,000 is like what a janitor makes. And then, obviously you can't be putting that much money away. It's gotta be $10 million a year or whatever at some timeline, but it's like, I just wish there was a way you could just say, this is what you do, nobody touch it. That's just what you have to do, like
Yeah.
interest payments, like you just gotta do it.
Yeah, and to your point about future councils, nothing prevents a future council from, deciding to make changes to environmental, concerns or whatever, like we had that during COVID, right? We did not subsidize the infrastructure because we were trying to save money, right, for contingency purposes. And so that was a time when instead of putting any money in, we decided that we are or instead of putting a regular amount in, like 210,000, we didn't put any money in for 1 or 2 years. And so that's always going to be the discretion of the council, the current council, to decide, do we want to hold rates, right? Even if there's a financial policy, council can essentially deviate from that. What you're trying to do is put as much guidelines in for the future so that there's at least a starting point for those discussions that people can say, this is what was agreed to, there's precedent. If going past that, it should be a thoughtful consideration, right? And kind of one of the problems we ran into was we had this target of $500,000, but it was never, codified, and council have been ignoring it, right? That's kind of one of the issues. But we want to make sure that we're thoughtful about what future councils are interpreting from our actions, and but again, council always has the discretion to, make changes based on, conditions. I don't know who had their hand raised first, Councilmember Rosengarten, and then Councilmember Young.
Earlier, I mentioned that if we made $1 million on our money that's in the bank right now, that's up and beyond what we calculated for expenses for this year. Would anybody consider the idea that I mentioned, that we take that $1 million and put it in infrastructure?
I think there's less than that full amount just because we have different funds that have reserved purposes, right? So the $27 million is broken across our 10 funds, right? Some of them have restrictions, like we can't use that money for subsidizing, like the hot fund, for example, or the crime control prevention district.
Right.
Those are things that, that money has to stay
can't
within
touch.
certain purposes.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what that amount would be in terms of interest, and of course, interest is somewhat variable, right, in terms of what, our current return, or what our forecasted returns are, but, I think that's something that we could, I'm glad that we have that much interest, right,
Yes.
that we have such a good return. I would say that we probably are seeing a significant jump in costs, right? For that equals interest, or comes close to it, because I've seen project bids come back that we have had to adjust our budget expectations based on construction costs going up. That's something that it's going to be, both of those things are going to happen at the same time. Interest rates are going to be better, but you're going to have these increased inflationary costs for basic work. So, Councilmember Young.
I was going to say that over the long term, interest rates are highly variable. And we know probably that this is going to be a peak for a while in terms of what we get from interest. So I would treat interest as a bonus that we may or may not get in any given fiscal year, as opposed to making plans for specifically how we're gonna use that money. Because it's gonna go up and down.
Well, and I think to that point, we've been talking about future councils. If we implement something like this and say we have a financial policy that's broad, right, saying we want to have a goal of achieving solvency in our operational costs, if we have a great year, right, where interest, comes in and we have this extra, maybe the council can opt to not have as significant an increase for the next year in rates, right, or maybe they skip a year, right, so that there's a looking at this as an opportunity to say, what is our, what have we achieved, this past year? At the end of the year, we have, calculations based on that. And so future councils may say, well, we want to hold off on doing this because we've received an extra, X number of dollars, or we're getting a rate increase from Austin at the same time, so we don't want to have double the impact of having our scheduled rate increase plus the rate increase from Austin. So that would be an opportunity for us to look at too. If we have a great interest year and we think that we can afford it, maybe there's a pause to the schedule. But again, I think not having some sort of guideline for future councils to have the discussion of the intention behind what we're doing is something we want to avoid when we do this. We want to put a financial policy in that's directing us towards a goal.
Right, and to go back to the conversation you and Councilmember Johnson were having before, I think the goal here in both these things, in terms of the utility infrastructure and breaking even on the cost of water, the goal is more important than anything else. All we can do is make the best plan on what we know today, knowing that things are going to change. But the idea as we go along, like you said, is this is guidance to future council for them to, as necessary, replan to meet those goals.
I think the other thing that, it's worth noting is that this year we actually moved out a lot of the operational costs for the water and wastewater, or the utility, right? So we moved some of that back in the general fund, and I think that's appropriate, right? When we took a look at the actual cost to provide the service, and there's adjustments there. So the subsidy was reduced as a result of that because we didn't have this significant operational cost. And I would really like the city to continue to focus on reducing operational costs to what it is, we need to support the system. And, smart meters are one of those things that, play into that. There's probably other, things that we can look at to continue to reevaluate on an annual basis what the operational costs are, and maybe there's a benefit or implementing some strategies that would cause less of an operational subsidy, to make sure that we're taking advantage of that. So I'm going to open it up for feedback from members of the public.
Thank you, Mayor. Melissa Gonzalez, 26 Reese. I really appreciate the excellent discussion that you guys have had tonight. And I just want to go back to something that I didn't feel like was perhaps covered as well as I'd like to see it covered, which is the program that we're going to extend to people in need. I think that maybe I heard wrong because I was distracted, but it seemed like it wasn't concrete enough yet. And I think just politically, the people who are going to be the most concerned about this are the people on fixed incomes. And I think if we were to outreach to, and if people have trouble, I could suggest some names, X, Y, and Z persons to make sure that they were in the parameters of this program as a real test case. Then we could say, after the fact, if you meet these criteria, this is what your bill would be, in there, so that you actually knew whether you fell in that. And if it was reasonable to take care of, say, these 3 or 4 individuals just as test cases, not because, like we used to have a rule for subdivision that Mary and Tricia could subdivide their lot. This is sort of the way we do things in our cities, that we sort of know some cases where you could get a 2-acre lot and we would make the things this way. And so in the same vein, we know that there's some residents who we have concerns about in our community that they would be able to pay their water bills. And so we take a test case and we say, roughly these are income parameters of these fixed incomes individuals, and given that, this is what their water bill would be, so that we can say, you people who are really worried about it, you don't need to worry, And I think that's a caring way for us to alleviate a lot of people's particularly potentially vocal concerns that we would be able to up front say, these are the parameters. So that's just, that, because that's to me the stop in my mind. What are we going to run up against? Those people who can't pay their bills, who are used to paying this, or who have a lot of worries about that. The people who could pay it in Austin and can pay it here, you know, that's just fussing. But the people where the rubber hits the road are those people who are elderly, and are they going to, you know, they're used to paying this much money, and will they still be able to, especially with higher food costs and all those other things. So I think I would just like to see a little bit more solidity about that, and so say, your sticker shock won't be so great because you'll do this, and we can help you, just like we typically do, walk you through how this would be, you know. So I just think that would be the one thing I haven't really heard us do, and that I think that this program and this information should go forward with the rate increase, because then people will feel cared for. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just in terms of that feedback, having a sense whether residents, you know, how difficult would it be for residents to qualify based on the criteria that we've outlined, right? You know, just in terms of, are we way off base, right, from, you know, what our current, you know, low-income residents have, but maybe they don't qualify based on one of those criteria. If we have the ability to kind of sample that, you know, I know that's maybe getting into, you know, privacy concerns, things like that, but if somebody's willing to.
We can certainly reach out. I mean, just among staff, we've discussed some people that we think potentially would qualify, or maybe there's someone, you know, that has complained when we've, you know, mentioned rate, and if we reach out to them personally and say, would you qualify, and they don't, maybe that's something we take back. But I would just argue that we don't try to personalize it too much. We've got to have a structure, right? We've got to have, like, these are your qualifying, you know, these are who qualifies, these are qualifying documents, so we're not, you know, I don't want to be asking for bank statements and billing indigency forms, and yeah.
No, we have to
But
have
we
a-
also, and we can't make it too personal where, oh, we love Mrs. So-and-so, let's cut her bill in half, but she, you know, she may not technically qualify. So obviously we want to be human with this, right? And so I think we can do some personal, confidential outreach to say, hey, you know, we're concerned about resident X, would they qualify? And maybe there's some more things we can add to
Yeah, I
the
think
list as we discuss with potentially
clearly we want to,
low-income residents.
we want to, like you said, a clear, straightforward determination. We don't want to be making the determination whether somebody's on, you know, qualified for this. We want to rely on other agencies that have already done some qualifications. And so Austin's a starting point, but there may be other things we get feedback on. So I would agree that getting that information would be useful. So Council, thank you for all the feedback and the discussion. My plan is on May 7th to bring back our draft high-level budget, work with staff, and bring that information to both council, but also looking for an opportunity to get feedback at that meeting, and looking at, you know, ways that we can advertise that so we can get feedback. I think by then, hopefully, we can also have a clearer understanding of what qualifications, you know, some of our residents might have, if we can do that work. And then the next step in that process would be presenting it to Budget and Finance, and, you know, they would be carrying this forward and having discussions. We'd get an opportunity for that budget, or that committee, to give us feedback as well. And then at the end of that would be my proposed budget in August, right? So this would be kind of the timeline and sequence, and the committee that would essentially be looking at this most closely would be Budget and Finance. So, all right. Any further discussion on this? All right. Well, let's go ahead and get a motion to adjourn. Anybody wants to propose that?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Seconded. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, we're adjourned at 6/7:25 p.m.
Matt, would you do me a favor? Look at the thermostat behind you and tell me what temperature it is.